Coming up on this week's show, what if Mario went CD on the SNES?
The must-have Neo Geo game of the summer.
And Joe Bonar is back. This time we talk about Burnout and Xbox Arcade.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every Friday with our wonderful sponsor, our friends at Bitmap Books. Now, have you checked out their latest volume, N64, a visual compendium? Now, this tells a story of the console that changed the gaming world back in the 90s and covers over 150 titles that defined the N64. They're all in there. Super Mario 64, GoldenEye 007, Legend of Zelda, Banjo-Kazooie. So you can check that out and the rest of their retro gaming collection on their website at bitmapbooks.com. And with our lovely mates at PCBWay. Now, maybe you're working on something retro over the summer. You know, they offer a fully featured custom PCB prototyping service, low cost, fast turnaround quality boards, and if you're in the market for services like 3D printing and injection molding, they've got you covered. And of course, you know that PCBWay, they're massive supporters of the retro community. So get an instant quote right now at PCBWay.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 428, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And very nice to have you joining us for the podcast that every Friday takes you on a nostalgic trip back to the classic age of video games. And of course, brings you up to speed on all the big happenings in the world of retro, of which there are many every single Friday on the podcast. And I think, you know, the bit that we all really get excited about, though, is the second half of the show when we welcome on an industry veteran to tell their story. Now, I will say there is one downside to this podcast. When we started doing it and we were brainstorming names, you and I, Ravi, and we came up with, you know, the Retro Hour. And we thought that'll keep it nice and concise. And obviously the name will limit the length we can do. It'll make us stick to that 1 hour show, of which I don't think we have for about 7.5 years, admittedly. But we try and keep it to around the 90-minute mark. But sometimes we have guests on that have just done so much in their career that it's impossible to fit into one episode.
Yeah, like, you know, we have guests and we're only hitting like, you know, 1992 or something like that.
I think 85 we got to the other week, didn't we?
Yeah, 85. And it's like, we love to do second parts as well. And we've had a lot of guests on in the past as well that we've said, we're going to do a second part with you. And, you know, we decided to actually follow that up. And one of the guests is Joe Bonar. And
this one was heavily requested as well in the comments. I remember when we did it. You need to get him back on.
Oh, yeah, because he's such a passionate guy. And it's such an interesting story. You know, the first one that we did was in episode 297. So it was back then. And it was, you know, talking about his early days with the C64 and how he was working with Telecomsoft. Then he moved on to Probe Entertainment, a huge company there, Acclaim as well. And he was working with Silicon Graphics workstations and working on games like Alien Trilogy as well. So there was some absolutely amazing tales on that. You really loved that interview, and Joe joined me on that one, and you really liked it, didn't you, Joe?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I had to jump back on this one. And Joe, funny enough, with the names, it gets confusing, but he's such
two Joes,
positive guy. Like, you know, not to say that anybody else isn't positive who we have on the show, but he was so positive, and it was really just a wonderful interview. And, you know, he's worked on so many classic IPs, Bomberman, Castlevania. We even touched on Sonic a little bit, like the opportunities he's had over the last kind of like you say, he started his career in 87. We kind of covered the late 90s up till kind of like the mid, probably 2010s in this episode. And as you say, Dan, the interview was about an hour long, hour and 1 minute long. So it's definitely going to be the retro hour and a half this week because it was such a fantastic interview with Joe.
We start on this interview on the GameCube. And we're going into like the Xbox, and we're talking about, you know, Burnout, which was just such a fantastic series. And then going into like the handheld systems as well. So stuff like the N-Gage as well.
Yeah, covered a lot.
You know, we don't usually have that much N-Gage chat, do we?
No, absolutely. And it's quite interesting, not to spoil it, but how he said when he was working on N-Gage games, he didn't realise that people kind of laughed at the N-Gage. Like, he said he wasn't.
We all want one now, though, don't we? Come on.
We all want that collection. This is very true. But yeah, he said he didn't really know kind of like, that it was kind of seen as a bit of a dud at the time, and he just thought it was this new crazy technology, and why not have a phone?
Nokia was so huge, weren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and to be fair, thinking about it was probably a bit ahead of its time because, a few years later, we're all playing games on, our phones when the iPhone and Android came along. So
he even says for him, it was the predecessor to the iPhone.
Yeah.
Like he said, that felt like the natural development into the iPhone for him, which I guess makes sense, really. Maybe it was just too soon.
And as someone who loves arcade races, I'm looking forward to hearing some stories about the Burnout series. I mean, because to me, Gran Turismo, those kind of games always felt a little bit stale, but I love a proper arcade racer.
Agreed.
And, Burnout 2 as well, that crash mode in there.
And also, they were released at different times as well. So some were released first as PS2 exclusives, and they worked on the GameCube and Xbox version and stuff. So it's a really interesting story, also about the origins of Burnout.
Yeah, so looking forward to this one. Joe Bonar, that is. We need to think about how we're going to work this. Maybe we should have a different name this week, Joe. We should call you maybe Foxy or something.
Foxy.
Yeah, so
Joe A and then Joe Bonar's Joe B.
I could just use full names, yeah. Joe Bonar, he's going to be our special guest. Part 2 with him coming up on the show in around half an hour from now. So that does mean we have 30 minutes to speed through all of the big headlines that have been making the news in the world of retro from over the last 7 days. And if we're talking about games in the 90s that we loved, I mean, obviously, Joe, you're a big Sega fan. Have you got a favourite Sonic game from back in the day?
Oh, my favourite Sonic game? Probably Sonic 3, I would say. Yeah, probably Sonic 3.
Loved a bit of a Sonic CD.
Yeah, well, Sonic CD was good.
Sonic CD does get very highly rated, which obviously was the version that came out on the Mega CD. And obviously, any other Mega CD wasn't a massive seller, but at the time when it came out, when I was a kid, seeing that in Dixon's or Comet or something, I remember looking at it thinking it looked very cool. That looked like a little bit like a mini stack system, didn't it? And that, slick tray that came out. Always like the look of the Mega CD. I'm looking over at my Model 1 now that's next to me with my Japanese Mega Drive on top of it. And obviously back then, the Super Nintendo didn't get a CD-based add-on. Obviously, you know the story about it nearly did, but that ended up, spinning off into the Sony PlayStation when company relationships broke down. But have you ever wondered what it would be like if there was basically an equivalent of Sonic CD for the Super Nintendo? Maybe Super Mario Brothers CD.
Isn't that just Hotel Mario?
But I think we could do better than
tiny
that.
discs as well, isn't it? Yeah, big CD.
Well, this is a fan-made game. Now, this is called Super Mario Bros. CD. Mm-hmm. And there's actually been a few people doing speedrun competitions of this over the last couple of months as well. But basically the idea of this is it's a ROM hack of Super Mario World that is in quotes, what if of sorts of a Super Mario Brothers game on a fictional CD-based console. So they're talking about, they've named it the Famicom CD in this imaginary world, which would have been basically a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo, and it would have allowed it to play games like Sonic CD, but obviously we wouldn't have got Sonic on the SNES, we'd have got a Mario game. So they've basically done what they think it would have looked like if the Super Nintendo got an equivalent to the Mega CD.
This really confused me because I understand that it's it's a ROM hack, it's a real game, it's a ROM hack that exists, but it's like, oh, you play it in emulation, but the idea is it came out in the 90s on a fake system that never came out. Yes. But then the wording of it really confuses me because obviously we did get a Famicom disk drive for the Famicom in Japan, which was the equivalent of the NES with the little yellow floppy disks.
Yeah, but this is basically if it had a CD add-on.
This is if it had a CD add-on.
But then I guess it would be a bit more powerful than, Hotel Mario on the CDI or something, because they've got all these modes that they've put into there. And, there's 40 levels in there. There's obviously the CD soundtrack. There's it
looks wicked.
A lot
want to hear about the CD
stuff with
soundtrack?
the parallax,
Check this out.
That was a big part of CDs, wasn't it? Having that.
That is very nice, isn't it?
CD soundtrack.
Yeah. Which it is possible to play this on the original system if you have a certain EverDrive. This one's called the FX Pack Pro, which is it's from Crix, who makes a lot of the EverDrives. I think all of the EverDrives actually under that brand name. Pretty pricey, $229 if you want to get hold of these. The FX Pack Pro, but it has got a load of modes in there, including a lot of expansion chips that are emulated, including this one that enables that CD quality music to be played through the Super Nintendo. So this gives you rich CD quality music. You've got fully animated cutscenes in here as well. You've also got Mode 0, which is a Super Nintendo background mode, which is a bit like Mode 7. But if you look at this, it gives you that nice parallax scrolling and very full backgrounds in these games. I mean, you skip through the video if you haven't downloaded the ROM. There is a YouTube video that'll link up on this page here. If you go through some of the later backgrounds, there's one with kind of these like blue and purple objects in the background. It looks like there's hardly a spare pixel on the screen.
It's pretty bonkers. It's like, do you also think people may develop other titles for this fantasy CD system that then work with ROM hacks?
I think there will be a bit of a scene for it, and this is going to sound like so stupid, but that level you've just mentioned with the purple and the blues and stuff in the background and the backgrounds. I look at it and I literally go, it looks like Sonic CD.
Yes. I think it's probably intentional.
But it's very intentional. It looks like Sonic CD, but it's Mario. But I mean, concepts aside of it's I think you put it wonderfully there, Ravi, a fantasy game console. I do think it looks wicked. And, it kind of reminded me as well of Mario Maker, which I did enjoy, but I kind of, with Mario Maker, I just want to be given here's 40 fantastic levels to go play. And this is what this is like.
Can't be asked to make them yourself.
I want to see what the cutscenes are like if they're those really bad animated CDI.
You look at Sonic CD. I mean, all that hand-drawn animation in that looked incredible. On the Mega Drive, so it was something akin to that. I mean, there's only a small trailer at the moment you can check out, and there is a speed run that you can download. Apparently, the kind of full version of it should be available in August. From the looks of the GitHub page. A few things I've noticed as well. I mean, looking at this, it does feel like, a what if, if they had the CD add-on and everything as well. But it kind of makes you wonder, maybe if Super Mario World never existed, this could have been almost like Super Mario Brothers 4. It looks very much a continuation of the...
I've just thought of the legal aspect of this. Do you think maybe making a fantasy thing like this means it's not going to get taken down by Nintendo because it doesn't exist? You're not kind of stealing off them. You're creating something for something.
It's still Mario, though, isn't it?
Yeah, true.
I get this now. If you want to get it, as we always say. But you see what I'm saying, though, Joe? This looks almost like it could be a continuation of the NES games.
Yeah,
if Super Mario World never existed, this could have been the game that they brought out on the SNES.
Yeah, it definitely. Even though it's a ROM hack of Super Mario World, the sprites of it and stuff, which once again it's intentional because they're saying it's a CD based add-on to the NES.
Yeah,
they do look very Super Mario Bros. Free.
Yeah,
they remind me of that more than they do Super Mario World. Right down not just to Mario but to all the enemies and bosses and stuff as well.
Yeah, it's going to be like in an alternate universe where Super Mario World never existed. This is going to be what we got, which I think, it looks very nice, actually. So, like you said, I mean, there's always that threat of doing anything with Nintendo's assets, and they've got all the usual disclaimers in here.
Yeah, all projects to the team are free and will remain free. And all of this stuff,
We hope that this does see a full release, but if you want to get there's a little speedrun demo you can download right now, so I put that in this week's show notes as well. Very cool to see. Now, it's also nice to see the Neo Geo getting some love as well with a game that I imagine would absolutely kick my ass because I was awful at Ghosts and Goblins, Ghouls and Goblins back in the arcade back in the day. I think 10p on that had lost me about 10 seconds.
Nice.
Yeah, dreadful at that game. Did you play it, Joe? I've got a feeling you did all right in it. Did you?
Yeah, what's the Super Nintendo one called? Super Ghouls and Ghosts.
Yes.
I have completed that before without any cheats.
I remember you saying that. I think that's the most impressed I've ever been with you.
Yeah,
when you said that.
And did it both times through, but that's when I used to be good at games and I had time. About 10, 15 years ago. But yeah, this is a Gladmort, which, doesn't hold any punches with straight up saying everywhere that it's heavily inspired by Ghouls and Ghosts.
With the difficulty to match, apparently.
Yeah, with the difficulty to match, the gameplay to match, the kind of art style to match. But it's kind of, imagine if Ghouls and Ghosts came out on the Neo Geo, because that's what they are going for. So it's by Pixel Heart, and it's currently on Kickstarter, and it has crushed it. It's on £100,000.
What's it been going, like 2 days at the time of recording?
Yeah, 2 days at the time of recording. Yeah, it looks fantastic. It looks like a really, really, really nice, I mean, it's a Neo Geo game, but it looks like a really nice Mega Drive game to me.
They've got a Josh Prod release of the Dreamcast title, and that's £31, which I think is pretty decent. Of course, you've got the Neo Geo cart here, which is about £216.
They're always expensive, though.
Yeah, and they're always massively expensive.
Yeah.
One thing I'm disappointed about, though, is because there was initially a rumor that it was going to be coming out on the Neo Geo CD, but it looks like that's not the case now. So when I first read that, because I mean, the only Neo Geo system I've got is the CD one. And I thought, that's pretty cool if I can get it for that, but apparently it's not in their plans currently by the looks of the Kickstarter.
Yeah, interesting that. Yeah, because of the Dreamcast version or the Steam version. The Steam version's €12, so it'd be £10.
Yeah.
Like Ravi's just said, you can get it on Dreamcast, with the PAL copy actually being a little bit more expensive, but I imagine that's because you get that nice blue case as well. That's €50, so £44. But yeah, interesting, Dan, that you just mentioned that, because you can get the MVS arcade version of the game.
Yeah.
Or you can get it as the AES cartridge. And obviously these are going to set you back like £300 to £500.
Whereas burning a CD is a lot cheaper than that. You know?
Yeah. So it is weird that they've not done a CD version for like, €50 or €40. But I guess it's just technology to print it. I'm not too sure what Neo Geo CD kind of runs on. If it's
they're not even protected,
CD.
I don't think.
Are they not?
It's probably straightforward enough to do, but it's like, I mean, I'm not massively into the Neo Geo scene. I know the CD doesn't get a lot of love from the community. Because I think, that used to having fast loading cartridges. The load times of a CD is often the biggest complaint I get. Yeah, but I mean, for me, who grew up with CD systems, I'm like, I've got to wait another like 10 seconds, big deal. Between levels, it doesn't bother me, but... So, but like you said...
It's interesting. The PAL version seems to come with original soundtrack CD as well.
Okay.
So, there's a few extras there and goodies and all these kind of stuff, done in packs. I like that they've done on the Dreamcast version, you also get a Steam key for the digital version soundtrack. And, they seem to have compiled it quite well in these little Kickstarter packs.
Yeah, and I think it looks really, really slick. I mean, there's only some kind of short trailers at the moment. But in terms of gameplay, you can definitely see that Ghosts and Goblins kind of influence, even down the weapons and stuff as well, and the enemies, and the weight controls, and like we said, the difficulty. Gorgeous backgrounds, though, as well. I think it really kind of does show the power of the Neo Geo over the consoles that we had back in the day. Yeah, and I think it looks awesome. I mean, I'm looking at this, and, I say this all the time. I think it would be nice to have this on the Switch.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you're not wrong. You do say it, but you're not wrong.
Yeah, I think it would feel very at home on there. So the fact that they've smashed that Kickstarter target, double in like 2 days, I think is very promising. So if you want to have a look at that and you're itching for a quality new Neo Geo game, or like you said, Ravi, just playing it on Steam, you can check that out right now. It's currently running. I'll link that in the show notes as well. Now, any of you guys do any programming? Back in the day?
I did mainly web stuff,
yeah,
to be honest, probably because it was easier.
You didn't have to do any at school. Did you ever do any like typing stuff at school?
No, you see, you're a bit older, Dan, but when I was at school, it was like, this is a CD-ROM. What does it stand for? It's when they introduced IT and the whole kind of coding and all that great aspect of it got taken out. But I do remember seeing some rooms full of, old BBCs and Acorn computers as well, but they were like the abandoned computer labs that no one used when the PCs came in.
Yeah, I did it. It'd have been just before I left school, actually, before I left junior school. For about 2 years, we kind of did it. I don't know whether it's just because I had a really good maths teacher who kind of fostered that in us. She really believed in kids learning programming. Then when I went to secondary school, none of it at all. It was all, learning word processors and stuff like that. Like you said, IT. Did my CLATE, I think it was called, if you remember that, the certification you can do.
Oh,
then went to college, and we did a little bit there because I did like an IT course at college, which was really varied. It was either making short programs in Pascal, which was one module. The next one was to build a PC. And that was like a big part of the course. And you got like graded, like I think something like 50% of the grade was whether you could like successfully put together a PC, which was literally like, plug in a graphics card,
Yeah,
Plug the hard disk
you were
in.
doing it all the time, Dan.
Yeah, I was like, yeah,
this is just,
did this yesterday
This
at
is just my weekend.
Yeah.
But I did a bit of PHP and JavaScript and stuff like that, played around with a few things.
It's funny though, the other day I actually saw on Facebook and I got into, not an argument, but a bit of a debate with someone. He posted a meme and it was a picture of the Amiga. And the meme was something like, do you remember having to type in programs from magazine listings? And everyone was like, oh, that's an 8-bit thing. That never happened on the Amiga. And I'm like, I remember buying like Amiga Shopper and, trying out the C tutorials in there.
I remember that there were lots of C tutorials.
Yeah.
And there were a few assembly things with Blitz Basic.
DevPack and stuff as well in Amiga format.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember doing all that. And AREX, I remember trying that out as well, which seemed to be like no one else remembered doing that on the Amiga. I was like,
oh, yeah, I've played around with AREX. Yeah, actually, I have done a bit of programming now. Now I look back at it.
And then Galahad commented on my post calling me a massive nerd, which thank you, Galahad. So it was, you
can't deny that. Dan.
Well, yeah, freely admit that, hands up. But I also remember, in terms of the reason we're talking about programming is because the programming language BASIC, which really was the first language many people, particularly here in the UK, used back in the 80s, because it was pretty much built into all the 80s micros that we had back then. It celebrated its 60th birthday on May Day last week. So
so many developers that have talked about BASIC in their first kind of experience,
that was the first language I used. Used it at school. And also I remember like sitting on my, because I had a Commodore Plus 4 and my mum got a load of programming magazines off my auntie. That I think she got from her brother. They were a few years old at this stage. But, whereas because my mum was a sysadmin in the local town hall, she ran like the mainframe. So where most kids would have, most parents would have maybe their kid on the knee reading them Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Me and my mum were typing fruit machine simulators out of magazines into my Commodore Plus 4.
And it's great to see that kids these days are kind of using, Raspberry Pis and they're doing Python and they're all kind of still typing in things as well, which is nice to see.
Well, there is a great article on The Register, basically talking about the fact that BASIC is still alive. And they kind of run through some of the big packages at the moment that you can get. There's one called a Small Visual Basic, which is basically an enhanced version of Microsoft Visual Basic. Gives it a GUI designer as well. There's a load of language extensions as well. And it uses visualbasic.net. That means exclusive to Windows, but that is free if you want to download that. One that I thought was interesting is Chloe 280 SE System 1, which apparently is a still maintained BASIC interpreter that works on the ZX Spectrum, which I thought was quite cool.
Yeah, and that's kind of turning into a machine, right? Or a larger project. This Z80-based computer.
Yeah, I think it's going to be like a replacement for the Spectrum ROM, like a copyright-free version of it. So it looks like it expands a bit beyond just the interpreter as well. I think, it runs on quite a few of the Sinclair emulators, and you can get it to run on real hardware as well. And there's one called QB64 Phoenix, which is basically they call it a freshly reborn version of BASIC as well. It's kind of it's compatible with Microsoft's QBasic, Quick Basic from back in the day. And this runs on, apparently they've got, packages that run on Windows, Linux, Mac OS as well. So if you want to get your fix of BASIC, it looks like it is pretty easy to do in 2022, which I think is very cool. I must admit, I've talked before about trying to do that adventure game myself on the BBC Micro that went horribly wrong. I think apart from typing in listings from magazines, the only real BASIC that I knew was going into Tandy and typing 10 print Tandy is crap, quote, 20 go to 10 and then running away.
That, yeah, on all of the machines. But maybe it's time you finish your game, Dan.
Yeah, maybe I'll pick one of these up and finally do that adventure game and then probably give up after about 2 days when I realised, it was difficult all along. But yeah, so you got happy birthday to BASIC, starting a whole generation of programmers turning 60 years old in the last week. Now, let's get on to something that looks very cool. This is a new indie game. We know we love our indie games. Inspired by, if you love snowboarding games back in the day, this is inspired by SSX and 1080.
It's always hard to say that one, isn't it? SSX. Yeah, I do remember lots of snowboarding titles. I was a real fan of them when they came out. Cool Borders was one that I really got into.
Yeah.
And Cool Borders 2, which I think was quite early on before the SSX games. But when SSX came out, obviously you had Tricky, which had that Run DMC. It's tricky every time you did a trick. But I always found the games these were games that were more popular with girls, they were popular with boys, but I also remember a lot of girls really got into SSX. And I remember with a lot of my friends, it would be one of the games that we'd all kind of universally play.
We played SSX Tricky a little bit. I had a friend who had it on GameCube, I believe. Was never very good at it. And kind of I remember always thinking, like, you always go downhill. Like, just being really naive, obviously.
Wouldn't work uphill very well.
Yeah. And wouldn't work, kind of like in a warehouse, like, Tony Hawk skateboarding kind of thing. But yeah, I know there's a lot of love for the SSX Tricky games and 1080 games, and we've not seen one in over a decade now. The last time anything was done with SSX there was one in 2012. And then there was talks of one coming out later this year, which apparently was cancelled, which was going to call Project Gravity, I believe.
Right.
And that was cancelled by 2K Games earlier this year. So it's good to see this game, Tricky, which is going to be a PC game coming out early next year as an indie game, which does look extremely similar to SSX Tricky.
I'll tell you what stood out with SSX was the way that you navigated a course. So you mentioned Tony Hawk's in there. You're running on your own momentum in Tony Hawk's, and you're picking lines and you're choosing what to do. SSX, you're forced down a hill, but there's so many secrets. There's so many different ways to do the routes that when you'd replay it, you'd find different jumps would lead into areas. You could do shortcuts. You can sneak past the other people, and it added that like kind of competitive element that made it really good fun. More you did it as well, the more kind of tricks you get, individual challenges as well. I remember playing that quite a lot. So I love to see that gameplay back again, and some new levels you can kind of explore and have like go off this jump at the wrong angle and suddenly you've landed on a different part of the run and you've saved a few seconds, and someone's like, where have you gone? How did you get there when you're racing?
I remember my brother having the demo of SSX on the PlayStation 2 on one of the magazine demo discs. I was never lucky enough to do tricks like that, and almost landed on my head and like broke my neck. So, I'm same as you, Joe. I've always liked the look of these games, but I've always been terrible at them.
Yeah.
But this
I'd
does look very
rinse
cool.
them, like I'd just play the same level over and over again until I totally know it.
That's it. It's practice makes perfect, I guess, isn't it? But this is a guy called Nathan Dirth who made this. He tried to do a Kickstarter back in February. He only wanted £3,990 for it, but missed out on it.
Okay.
Which I think, looking at this, I think there's definitely a market for that. And obviously, we try and cover as many of these as we can. We didn't hear about it back then. So I think, in my mind, it was probably just people didn't know about it.
Yeah. Because so many of them smash it usually.
That's it, yeah.
There's definitely a demand for a new snowboarding game, an arcade style one at least anyway,
and
I would say.
Now I think about it as well, like there were developments within them that were like the skateboarding games, but a bit different. So like, you had the trick meters and stuff like that you'd hit, your combos and all of that with tricks. But I remember grinding as well was awful on some of the early ones. You'd just literally stand there and slide over on your snowboard. And then that really developed with SSX as well. So I'd love to kind of see the new things that have been crafted into there, like apparently Uber tricks. So I want to see what those are like. Maybe an Uber delivery guy turns up in the
brings your food to you in like a tattered paper bag, like a total.
Have a kebab whilst you're doing it.
Well, luckily, he hasn't been dissuaded by the Kickstarter failing. He's actually decided that he's going to continue it. There are demos he's been releasing over the last couple of months on itch.io. He's doing plenty of social media updates as well. And really, it looks like he's retaining that spirit that made people fall in love with the SSX games back in the day. So basically, if you want to get a hold of this, there is a demo of it that you can currently download on Steam for computer platforms. It's available on the Mac, on Linux and Windows as well. And you can add it to your Steam wish list as well. So when it's finished, you will get alerted to that and you can get the full game, hopefully. So it's nice to see that he continued with it, even though the crowdfunder failed, because I think there's definitely a market for this. Even though I'm terrible at these games, I think, there's definitely a space for them. So
and just to play it in the higher resolution is something that really appeals.
And hoping it's got a banging soundtrack like, they all did back in the day as well.
Oh, of course.
Big part of it. So if you want to check that out, I'll link that up in the show notes as well. Right, then one more story to talk about before we hop into our interview with Joe Bonar, part 2 of him, coming up in just a minute. Now, we've talked about it on the podcast before. I remember when we had Mel Croucher on, God, it must have been 5 years ago now, that is still, I think, one of my top 5 interviews that we've ever done. he was talking about the fact that he worked at a local radio station, and at night he used to basically broadcast computer software over the airwaves.
Yeah.
I love that idea.
Yeah, I think that's great because after all, it is just a kind of signal that you can receive and then
Just
put
a
onto
sound,
tape.
isn't it?
Yeah, the thing is, I guess you'd probably have to have like a quite good aerial and not that much interference when you're tuned in, you know. But I can imagine nowadays it's a lot easier to do with radios that lock in. And
you don't need a dial anymore. It's digital now.
The kind of quality that you have. I don't know if you could do it on digital radio. I'm sure that would be even better.
Well, it's just, so the idea was that he would broadcast software over the airwaves for 8-bit micros, and you'd record it on your cassette deck and then put it in your Commodore 64 or your VIC-20 or whatever, and then play it back. Now, I do remember trying to do tape-to-tape copying on the Commodore 64 and the Plus 4 back in the day, which first couple of times I tried it, it didn't work very well. A lot of errors and stuff as well, so you definitely had to have kind of the alignment of the heads right and had to use a decent quality tape. I think the Spectrum is a bit less fussy than the Commodore machines. I mean, I guess it probably helped because you could basically set the volume on the Spectrum, because you're using an external tape deck, and you could hear it through the TV when it's loading as well. But the reason we're talking about this is that a ZX Spectrum game has been broadcast on Slovenian radio, on FM radio, 40 years after it initially was, for users to tape and play. Now, this happened last week, so we're talking very recently, and this is a game called Contraband 2.
I think this is wicked because, like, obviously you could just get the audio file off the internet, but that's not fun, is it? The best, they've got a little recording steps guide as well, which is like, have your Spectrum ready, find a quiet area, tune in. Like, I can imagine if you were recording it, like, how you were doing it, maybe with a microphone or something like that. You have your mum
back in the day, not
like,
direct to tape.
Dinner's ready in the middle of it, and then it kind of ruins the game.
Mum, you're spoiling my game. I think this is awesome, and I wonder how many people did this, because this was, at the time of recording, actually, it was yesterday, so unfortunately we're a week late with promoting it, but it was on the 8th of May, so on Wednesday, 9:30 in Slovenia on a station called Radio Student FM, 89.3. And basically, if you tuned in at 9:30 p.m., you could record this game, Contraband 2. Now, this game actually was quite interesting as well, because back in the day, a lot of, obviously, people behind the Iron Curtain were doing their own clones of Western machines. I mean, obviously, there's that massive Spectrum clone scene that we talked about back in the day. And actually, the idea
Soviet
of...
Spectrums, weren't they?
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea of Contraband 2 is that basically you had to collect the parts of a ZX Spectrum to build your own machine. And then there was the second game, which we're talking about here, saw players head to the year 2000 to discover the consoles of the future, mixed in with punk rock songs from The Contraband. So it does sound an interesting concept for the game as well. So you can just download this game if you want to try it out on Internet Archive and play it on an emulator, but where's the fun in that? You want to sit there with the Spectrum recording this, don't you, off the radio? That's a cool way of doing it.
Yeah.
Do you remember when you used to record the top 40?
Yes.
I'm going to admit something. Okay, I got some of my brother's old tapes and thought, what's this noise on there? These are broken. I'm just going to record over them. Probably recorded the top 40 over his games.
Oh wow. Over Contraband too.
I don't know why that's not working. But yeah, I mean, I do think that's awesome. I wonder how many people actually sat down, if anyone, and recorded it and played it back. I hope somebody did, because I do think that's awesome. So if you want to read about that, I'll put that. And of course, everything else we talk about, you don't have to Google around. I save you the job. I'll put them in the show notes on your podcast app, or you can check the website at theretrohour.com. A little reminder as well that we do have a Patreon that really helps support this podcast. Really one of the main reasons that we can continue doing this each week. We did have a wonderful Patrons Hangout a couple of weekends ago. We do these every single month. Last Sunday of the month normally, all get together, a massive Zoom call with our patrons and completely geek out. We've also just dropped the latest episode of the After Hours podcast for our gold members and above. Bit of a giggle this one, actually. We've had some good feedback about our movie episode. You enjoyed this one, Joe?
I you know what? I felt so out of my depth. You know, you guys, we were talking about...
You suggested the idea.
I know, I suggested it. And we were talking about kind of like retro tech films. And I just ended up talking about a few of my favorite kind of action horror films which have tech in them. And
anything that had a computer or a phone.
Yeah, pretty much in the background. And I felt completely like I'd missed the mark. But I actually saw some nice comments that Dan shared with me from Discord saying like, you know, Joe's just mentioned some of like my favorite films of all time. So I really appreciate those comments. But you guys had some absolutely wicked suggestions, and you definitely need to put a list out on the Discord channel to the back.
You still need to see that film I mentioned, Dan, as well.
Yeah, I've literally, because I mean, there hasn't been a few. You're right. It was Chris McLeod who he said Joe's basically picked 4 of my top 5 films. So people are with you. Like we've had a few people asking for, if we can put a little list together. So I'll put that in the comments as well. I think I've seen all the ones you mentioned, Joe, because they are massive films everyone can see. There's a couple you mentioned there, Ravi. I was like, that sounds really good.
Don't think anybody's ever heard of Terminator, have they?
Spoilers. No. Spoilers, isn't it? Spoilers. But yeah, it was a really enjoyable episode, and actually waited almost 2 hours. So we do these every month for our Gold members and above. 42 episodes that you can unlock if you join us on Patreon right now. So a very good time to join and, of course, support the podcast as well. All the details are at theretrohour.com. And actually, for our patrons, we do a couple of extra news stories. It's going to be talking about a rare Super Nintendo and a very cool new Game Boy game for our patrons in just a moment. Keep locked. For everybody else, let's talk about our wonderful sponsor, ExpressVPN. Now, ExpressVPN have been one of our longest running supporters, and it is the only VPN that we use and trust as well. Now, obviously, we know about VPNs protecting our privacy and our security online, but actually we use it for more than just that. I know, Ravi, you're always kind of globe-trotting virtually using ExpressVPN and checking out movies and shows that you can normally only see in other countries.
Of course, Friends on the UK one, even though I've seen that a million times on, what's it called, E4, but it still never gets old. I love Friends. And,
Friends seems to be one of those shows that my missus must have watched the entire run of Friends about 15 times now.
She watched Sex and the City as well.
Yeah, as well. Yeah. Never gets bored of that.
Parks and Recreation, which is absolutely awesome as well. And, Vikings on the Canadian Netflix as well. So you can switch around and do it pretty much instantly and change the location of your country and access lots of this new content.
Yeah, because that's the thing. I mean, you're thinking about something like Netflix. I mean, they've got, over 100 different libraries around the world, many of which cost licensing and stuff like that. You can only get in certain countries at certain times. Use ExpressVPN. You could be watching, if you love Korean dramas, you could watch Parasite on South Korean Netflix. Like you said, there's all these amazing shows, You can watch Rick and Morty on the Australian Netflix, Fargo on the Canadian Netflix as well. So literally, it's a press of a button as well. It doesn't just work with Netflix, all the big streaming services, Hulu, iPlayer, YouTube as well, because YouTube has region-locked videos. And there are hundreds of VPNs out there, we know that. But the reason we love ExpressVPN, not only for their incredible reputation, but because it is so fast as well, particularly if you're watching media.
I forget about it. I have it on my laptop, hooked up, and I'm like, why am I getting American news sites or the American version of the BBC? Oh, my VPN's still on.
So, but yeah, there's no buffering, no lag, streaming HD, no problem at all. And like you said, works on all your devices, phones, consoles, smart TVs, lots more as well. So you can watch it on the go or on the big screen. So if you want to use ExpressVPN, which, pays for itself, get access to hundreds of new shows, these streaming services you pay for every month, get your money's worth. So use our exclusive link. They'll know that we sent you. Really helps out the podcast. And you'll also get, as a little bonus, you'll get 3 months of ExpressVPN for free on top of your 1-year plan. So head to expressvpn.com/retro. That's our exclusive link, expressvpn.com/retro. And a massive thank you to our friends at ExpressVPN for their continued support of the show. Right then, next, an incredible guest who returns for the second time to continue talking about his career, talking about classics like the Burnout series, Xbox Arcade as well, and lots more as well, with Joe Bonar. He's next on the Retro Hour podcast.
You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and we're here today with Joe Bonar. And, Joe's joining us for a second part because previously we had him on maybe 3 years ago, and that was on episode 297. A really interesting episode where he talked about his history of development with, the C64, working with Telecomsoft, and then going into Probe Entertainment and Acclaim, and all the kind of development that happened from that, 8-bit era going into the 3D graphics era with, Silicon Graphics workstations hooked up, amazing titles like Aliens Trilogy. And, we decided Joe's got so much to talk about and he's worked a fantastic career. Let's get him back on and let's talk about some other systems this time, which will be, the PS2, Xbox 360 and the Game Boy Advance. All these are actually kind of counted as retro now. So we're happy to be covering them. He's also got a good history with handhelds as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about the N-Gage, which was a really, really interesting machine. Now, Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing extremely well, thanks, Ravi. Just having a really good time over here in North Vancouver. I actually had all the doors and windows open because it's such a spectacular day over here. But the local mountain is doing some what they call helicopter operations, which is bringing, I guess, bits and pieces up and down the mountain. So it's pretty noisy. So we don't get to hear the bird song and the gentle whisper of the breeze through the trees because of the helicopters. So for now, all the windows are closed and here I am for you.
So we won't get any flybys during this.
Hopefully not.
Well, I thought we'd start off with, the kind of modern retro systems, which, the GameCube. And I was wondering, what did you think of that system? And do you remember the first time you saw a GameCube?
Yeah, I do. I absolutely loved it. The thing that just really appealed to me, and I don't know whether it's changed over time. Maybe it hasn't. It was cute. It was a cute device. It was literally called a GameCube, and it was a cube that played games. It had that little carrying handle. It had those cute little discs. Everything about it was cute. And actually, I've still got the purple GameCube that I bought. It's got a little chip out of the side now, but it still works. And we still get to play all of those games. And funnily enough, tangentially, because it's not like me to go off at tangent, I'm actually thinking about digging out the Wii U.
Nice.
So that I can play some of the HD, and I'm using air quotes here, some of the HD versions, particularly Twilight Princess. I'd love to play that again. But anyway, yes, GameCube, cute, very Nintendo, purple, carrying handle, little discs, lovely.
What did you find the experience of developing for the GameCube? Because obviously I grew up with a GameCube and my older brother used to always say the GameCube's a baby's games console. But looking back, a lot of people will say it's more powerful than the likes of the Xbox and the PS2. And you've actually worked on the architecture of kind of all three of those systems. What would you say with that kind of statement? Would you agree the GameCube was a little powerhouse, or was it a bit of a different system to kind of work on?
Yeah, I've been thinking about the differences. I'm not really sure how significant they were. One of the things about most, if not all, of Nintendo's devices, and this is either a horrible generalization or something else, is that, whenever Miyamoto wanted to make a game, he would design the controllers, he would design the way that you would interact with the game. And Nintendo would build it, and they would only build what was necessary to make the particular game that he was working on at the time. That might just be something that I heard somewhere or read somewhere. But, the controller was very, very specific for which one was it? One of the Zelda games anyway.
Yeah.
And, the hardware was no more powerful than it needed to be. And in some ways, that followed through to the Wii, because that was all about the controller. It followed through to the Switch even. The Switch is only as powerful as it needs to be.
And of course, the Wii was backwards compatible as well with the GameCube.
It was.
Yeah. Some of the versions had those controller ports as well.
And in some ways, I think that's different from how Microsoft approached the Xbox. They wanted to make the most powerful device that they could for the money. And I think probably Sony as well. So Nintendo sort of made custom input-output hardware and then built around that. Xbox built the most powerful PC that they could and put it in a box. And Sony They built the most powerful hardware that they could, bespoke in some cases. So there's three different approaches, I think, to the way that works. Back at Criterion, we were using renderware, and as a consequence of using renderware, in some cases we were a little bit away from the hardware. You know, in terms of sort of design and tools, renderware allowed us to move from one device to another. But I know for sure that all of the engineers, they were coding down to the bare metal, so they had a different experience than we did as a production and design team.
Was it weird to kind of see, because obviously historically Nintendo have been very strict with what games would come out on their consoles, and they wouldn't kind of go out to the third parties as much as they did until it came to the 6th generation with GameCube. Do you think that was it weird for you kind of seeing Nintendo break that tradition of like the legacy they've had, and do you think that still runs through to the Switch now?
I think it does. I remember at least feeling like it was remarkable. I think it was probably even before the GameCube. Did Mortal Kombat not appear on the SNES?
It did.
But it had those blood-like limitations.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. I think it was green blood, yeah.
So, you know, when that happened, it was a real surprise, because it was like, you know, this is not a game that Nintendo would readily welcome onto their system. But I guess it must have made financial sense for them to do it. And I guess it continues to make financial sense for them to have, again, invisible air quotes, controversial titles on their hardware, because ultimately, why not? Why not do that?
Did the disc size cause any kind of limitation with the game as well, and what you could put on it for the GameCube version?
I don't have any specific recollection of us sort of coming up against disc size problems. But if I'm pulling, you know, from those deep, dark memories of 20 years ago, we may have had some trouble streaming data from those discs on the GameCube, because one of the things about Burnout is that the tracks were streamed off the discs. And I think that there might have been something. You would probably have to ask somebody way more technical than me, but I do have some recollection that we didn't have to slow down the vehicles. We just had to lay the data out differently on the GameCube as opposed to on some of the other formats.
Well, talking of Burnout, it's quite a unique concept as well. You know, the idea of a kind of car destruction game. Of course, you had like Destruction Derby and games like that before. And Burnout seems to be more kind of based on Test Drive or something like that. What did you think when you first saw the title?
So I think I might have, I don't know whether we discussed it last time, but I remember seeing Burnout when I was working at Electronic Arts. Alex and Fiona came over and they showed us a demo of Shiny Red Car. It was called SRC, or Shiny Red Car at the time. And it was amazing. You know, Alex has very high production expectations. Nothing ever should run at less than 60 frames a second or 50 frames a second in the UK. Although I don't think that's as relevant anymore with, you know, LCDs and HDMI connections rather than SCART. But yeah, everything had to run, you know, silky smooth. So it was a silky smooth racing game. And initially it was just about pure racing. And Burnout 1 was a very, very pure racing game with the Burnout mechanic. And I remember part of the vision for that game was a movie, and I've actually got it up somewhere. It's called C'était un rendezvous by Claude Lelouch. He was driving a Ferrari through Paris early in the day. It was, you know, like a Ferrari 94 or something, and it is insane. And everybody had to watch that video because it completely captured the essence of Burnout. Happy to send you a link so that you can take a look at it. And it really does, to me, feel like a bit of that history, because you look at it and it evokes everything that Burnout evokes.
Yeah.
And of course, crashing is fun.
Yeah.
crashing is fun. And I remember when we were playing the game, you always wanted to win. But when you crashed, it was a pain in the ass, but it was always cool. And then I actually don't think it was until Burnout 2 that we started to make a fuss about the crashing. And because what was happening is that the designers, Christopher Roberts and Paul Cross, they were just setting up junctions, and they were setting up areas in the game where you could just crash. And they were having so much fun doing that, and we were having so much fun watching it. We literally turned it into a game mode. So it was emergent gameplay that came from the designers that we then turned into a mode. So that's where the crashing came from, because crashing is fun.
Yeah. And it was all about how much damage you could cause and how much money it cost to cause that. Yeah.
It's like, how do you score a crash? And the answer is, how much would it cost? That's a great mechanic, because you start to chain things together, and it's like, oh yeah, I just hit a fuel tanker, and that was a really expensive thing.
Yeah, it's amazing when it just keeps going and going. It's like, oh, the fuel tanker's now hit the big truck carrying all the trees, and the trees are now rolling down the hill and hitting all the cars. And it was very what's that film, Final Destination, as well, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. Was that before or after Crash Mode? Because they might owe some royalties.
It was around this. Oh, it was around the same time. I want to say 2003, 2002.
Let's not get too controversial.
Yeah.
I was wondering. You were saying that you were developing with renderware. That was going out to the GameCube and the Xbox. Was there like a time delay with releases, or did they kind of come out at the same time? Did you work with them at the same time and then release them, or do them separately?
I think probably back then there was some delay. It might have only been, a day or two, because you might lead on one particular platform and then just make sure that everything worked on the other platform. It wasn't, I don't know, or I don't recall it being true parallel development like we are more used to these days. So there was probably a delay. And also back then, any sort of delay, and I hesitate to use the word delay. I'll use the word timing. Any timing on those releases was often in the hands of the publisher, in terms of, booking the manufacturer of discs, booking revenue to a particular week, month, or quarter. Because, I'm going to say back in the day, even though it doesn't feel like back in the day to me, you had your disc, you tested the hell out of it, you manufactured it, and that's that. You didn't get to patch anything on GameCube or PlayStation.
Do you think we mentioned the crash mode there, and there was also pursuit mode as well in Burnout 2? Do you think those kind of improvements to the game and extra modes helped with the longevity of the game? Because obviously Burnout ended up being an absolutely huge series, which just, spanned probably over a decade off the back of that.
Yeah, I think each improvement that was made to the game came from how much we loved playing the previous game and what we wanted to do in the following games. So there was a lot of replay value in Crash Mode. There's a lot of replay value in Pursuit Mode. And 99% of that came from the team, came from the people that were making it. And it's like, wouldn't it be cool if ... Or I can't remember, Burnout 3, that was much more open world, wasn't it? And I think that came from, wouldn't it be cool if? And I think that the games, and I don't have a chip on my shoulder about it, I think that the games are far more driven by the team, far more driven by passion for the product than games now being driven by marketing and being driven by recurring revenue and stuff like that. I think the situation has changed. whether the situation has matured or whether the situation has deteriorated or improved, is tough to say. But the things that came about in Burnout were almost always driven by the team.
Yeah. And, when the team were developing Burnout 2 and, all these fantastic ideas were coming in and stuff, traditionally it's an arcade racer, and it kind of definitely for me and my friends growing up and a lot of other people who talk about Burnout, it definitely has that kind of party feel to it, a very take it in turns, see if you can outdo each other, get the crash high score. Was that kind of like the idea from the start to have that kind of like arcade cabinet feel, but at home as a PlayStation 2 game, which kind of becomes that kind of party game when you're having drinks and pizzas and stuff?
Oh yeah, 100%. And that comes from Alex's vision as the game director. He has, and I assume still has, a real passion for arcade games, a real passion for being crowded round a Robotron machine or a fighting game, or frankly a racing game, and taking turns. When you lose, in the arcade you would step aside. At home, you would hand somebody the controller.
Yeah.
And the whole idea is that it's fun to watch and fun to play. And also that competitive nature of causing $100,000 worth of extra damage than the previous player. See if you can get $125,000 worth of extra damage. See if you can, blow up that thing or knock a tree into the other thing. So absolutely, it was purposeful. And it's also how we played it in the office.
Nice.
I would have loved to have seen some arcade cabs of Burnout. I know there was a few in Asia of Burnout 3, but I just think that would be a great game to have in the arcades, wouldn't it?
It really would. And I don't know how people feel about arcades now, but they are such nostalgic things to me. I think I mentioned before, I've got 3 arcade cabinets in my basement playroom, as I like to call it. They're big, they're heavy, they require a whole bunch of maintenance. But
which ones do you have? You've got to tell us which ones you have. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to keep it a secret. Each one has a story as well, and I could tangent about those. I have a Defender arcade machine.
Oh, nice.
Oh, wow.
I have a Space Invaders, an original Space Invaders. And I actually have an Asteroids sit-down cocktail cabinet, each of which has a rich story associated with it. But yeah, nothing looks and feels like them. And as you can probably guess, each of them is different and wonderful for a different reason. The Asteroids cocktail cabinet, or the sit-down with looking down on the screen, that has a Vector XY monitor. Which terrifies me because if it breaks, it's going to cost a fortune to fix. The Defender still has its original tube, and I really need to fix the caps because the guns are starting to diverge. And I think the image looks fabulous, but it is maybe starting to get a bit blurry. And the Space Invaders machine, it's a black and white monitor, still the original monitor. And weirdly, that colored gel, like the green lines that you would get at the top and the bottom, completely gone. Hasn't even left any residue. See, I'm on a tangent already.
Yeah, but the fans want to hear it.
No, that sounds like a wicked basement. Definitely.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. It is pretty cool. When my daughters bring their friends down, they all want to pile into the basement.
Well, it was very interesting, the PC world at the time. PC CD-ROM had developed to quite a high standard, and you did some edutainment games as well. And we've had so many developers on that have gone into the world of edutainment as well. And you did Scooby-Doo Case Files #2, and it was good to see some kind of animation. And the legendary Scooby. I remember seeing the animation on that was really good actually for its time. What was it like working in that kind of edutainment world, and also how much had the PC CD-ROM technology developed?
That was a really fun time because it was exactly the right thing to do based on the age of my kids. My kids were playing games on the PC CD-ROM. They were playing Barbie games and they were playing Freddy Fish, those humongous games that with art by Sandy Spangler, Pajama Sam. They were playing all of those games. They were exactly the right age for it. So when I had the opportunity to work on Scooby-Doo and the Scary Stone Dragon, I just jumped at it. We worked very, very closely with Warner Brothers, who, as you can imagine, are deeply invested in the authenticity of how their brand is represented. They gave us an extremely detailed style guide, style Bible, and brilliantly, what are they called? Illustrator files for all of the characters. So we actually had like the source art for all of those characters. So when you see Velma putting up her finger and saying Jinkies, that is exactly the same art that you would see in the TV show and you would see across all of the other games.
That's really important because we had Mark Brown on who did the creator of Arthur, and we were talking about the edutainment Arthur games as well and how they were connected so well to the animation. It's important for kids like playing those games to actually recognize the characters and have that exact kind of reproduction of it.
It is, because all of us are pattern matchers. We will see things that are wrong based on previous patterns. So, if Scooby doesn't look like Scooby, or if Arthur doesn't look like Arthur, kids are going to notice, and, they won't feel like they're getting as authentic an experience. We also had loads of fun with the backgrounds. I think it was the first time I heard the phrase painterly. It needs to be painterly. And I was working with an artist who actually painted the backgrounds. Now, she was using, the equivalent of a Wacom tablet, but the software that she was using was like paint brush strokes, which I guess was fairly revolutionary at the time. But we were working really closely, and I'm struggling to remember the name of the person at Warner Brothers, but we're actually still friends on Facebook, and we still ping each other from time to time. She was giving us really very solid art direction about how Scooby-Doo backgrounds need to look. There's a lot of atmospheric perspective. The blacks are truly black. So when there is a shadow, it's black. So we started to iterate on the work that we were doing until we got it nailed. And then we were able to produce production quality, broadcast quality, painted Scooby-Doo backgrounds. That was fun. But yeah, having somebody on the other side at Warner Brothers, which with such exacting standards, drives quality. And also, when you know the rules, it's easy to follow them and it's easy to do well.
That's good. And obviously, with it being a PC CD-ROM game, and you had previously worked with the Xbox, was there big differences at the time, kind of between working on Xbox and PC, with them both being Microsoft systems, essentially?
Oh, yeah, there was. With a PC CD-ROM game, you could just test it as much as you felt like it needed to be tested. You had the client, in this case, Warner Brothers, test it, and then they would publish it. Boom, done. On the Xbox, you had to go through a whole bunch of Microsoft quality stuff. There was a 3-ring binder where, you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do this. And what happens if a controller is disconnected? What happens if a controller runs out of batteries? What happens if your disc is scratched? What happens? There's all sorts of stuff, which carries over now to all of the console development stuff. But yeah, the rules are different because Microsoft and Nintendo and Sony, they sell consoles and they don't want people to phone up and say my console is broken, when in fact it's the software that is malfunctioning.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I've never thought about it like that, because if there's a game going out there that's crashing, etc., they don't want to take the heat for that when it was actually the developer.
Yeah, because they if a game crashes and the console locks up, there is a tendency, and I don't think it applies to a lot of people, there was a tendency to say, you know, my console's broken, I'm going to take it back to the store.
Yeah.
And I want another one. Because, I think people understand software now more because with the phones in their hands, they're less likely to think that their phone is broken than whatever piece of software they downloaded. But, you know, back then, that was definitely one of the rules.
Yeah, definitely. And around that same time, you then went on to join Digital Eclipse, which must have been an exciting time with so many interesting projects at the time. How was that?
It was a spectacular time. It was really extremely enjoyable. Digital Eclipse was right in the center of all sorts of different things. And it was a super productive, super interesting time in the industry. There was new consoles, there was new tech, there were new companies spinning up. There were old companies that wanted their IPs to be recreated or improved in many ways. And the business development folks at Digital Eclipse were, and frankly still are, spectacular at pulling in diverse projects. I think one of the first things that I was there towards the end of was Spyro and Tron.
Yeah.
So I just joined as those two were finishing up. And I remember the very talented producer, project manager, Laurie Clay, working on those two. And we just had the opportunity to work on so many different things. Digital Eclipse specialized in emulation and retro. That they still do. The Jeff Minter collection is chef's kiss. It is a beautiful piece of, I guess, museum history now.
Mentioning Tron as well, you worked on Tron 2.0, the killer app, which was a interesting kind of Tron concept for the Game Boy Advance that had a lot of mini games and stuff. What were your memories of this title?
Honestly, my memories of that title are scant. It was being finished up when I got there, so I played it. I enjoyed it. I realized that it was a fascinating concept because it was essentially the Tron arcade game with some exploration and other cool stuff added onto the top. So I'm pretty sure that it included a Digital Eclipse emulation of the arcade. So it was literally the arcade machine running on the Game Boy Advance. And it was, it had the sort of, not veneer, because it was a bunch of extra stuff that was on the top. So it was a pretty interesting and robust concept that was really well executed, I thought.
Did you find working on the GBA, kind of going from the GameCube, the Xbox, etc., did you find that a little bit of a step back, or was it quite exciting to work on such a powerful handheld?
It was exciting. I love new things. I love innovation. And innovation doesn't necessarily mean going forward all the time. We spoke about how the hardware is designed with maybe 1 or 2 games in mind, maybe 10 or 15 games in mind. And the Game Boy Advance was designed to be a pretty powerful handheld device. And I remember one of the first things that we did is Jeff Vavasor, George and Peter Phillips. Now, the Game Boy Advance did not have a backlight.
No, it didn't. It was the SP, wasn't it?
They added backlights to it. Like they opened it up and they soldered little LEDs, which were like super expensive and super finicky at the time. So we were all actually working on Game Boy Advances with backlights in them, which was pretty cool.
That's cool.
But one of the things that I often talk about, even to this day, is if you are aware of the limitations of a piece of hardware or literally anything, if you're aware of the limitations and you work within those, there is a certain joy and a certain happiness in creating something that is amazing within those limitations.
Well, also, I think that got released for the Xbox, and going from the Game Boy Advance to the Xbox, nowadays we see an indie game scene with like lots of mini games, lots of kind of titles that are pushed out there. It wasn't seen as kind of that popular back then, but the Xbox really embraced that, and that kind of led onto Xbox Arcade. What was the process of getting a Game Boy Advance title onto the Xbox?
So I think at the core, it was a digital Eclipse emulation. So what those guys did, Jeff Avisser and George and Peter Phillips, and there was a couple of others. Vernon was another absolute down to the metal guru genius. There was a guy called Jim Free, I remember. Anyway, what they were good at is taking the ROMs and the hardware of an arcade machine, whatever it might be, and wrapping it in, a capsule so that it didn't know that it was running on whatever piece of hardware. The arcade machine thought it was running in an arcade machine, and yeah, sure, I'm giving it a personality, but the code didn't know. So whether it was running on the Game Boy Advance, whether it was running on an Xbox or a PlayStation or whatever, it just didn't know. So these guys were really, really smart at taking the inputs and the outputs and mapping them to whatever. So if Tron 2.0 included an emulation version of the arcade game, it was the same fundamental stuff running on whichever platform. So then you have to worry about the rest of it running on the Xbox. And then, of course, you have to worry about the different three-ring binder based on the actual publisher, whether it was Microsoft or Nintendo or Sony. That's the biggest bit that you really need to worry about.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the when Xbox Arcade came around, it was supported from the top at Microsoft. Bill Gates was a really big pusher of that and a really big fan, and it's quite pioneering as well. But also, had that good support structure, and it added stuff like achievements in there and online play as well, and being able to share all your scores and stuff. Did this mean that you wanted to get more committed to it, and all that kind of support? Did that really help you? Because I know you're a big arcade fan.
It was a fascinating time, and looking back on it, I didn't realize how instrumental we were at Digital Eclipse in shaping what Xbox Live Arcade actually was. It might sound weird, but everybody involved was pioneering. I remember we were working with Katie Stone Perez, and I think it was her first gig at Microsoft at the time. She's still there, actually, pretty high up in the organization. But we worked with her to define what Xbox Live Arcade was. Now, we had a ton of content, and, each day we would deliver content, and it would be like, hey, what about this? What about this? And, that might become achievements. Now, I'm not saying we designed achievements, but, we would help refine what those actually were over time. And the infrastructure was built around the work that we were doing, and others, of course. It wasn't just us. I don't want to say we made Xbox Live Arcade, because that would be disingenuous. But certainly we were there helping to create what it actually became, which was really exciting. So if we had a cool idea, then we could share it and we could find a way to support it. It was really collaborative and wonderful.
Speaking of Xbox Arcade as well, you worked on Bomberman Live, which was a really strong arcade title. Another game of yours that I used to play at parties with friends, funny enough. What were the challenges in making such an iconic title again? Bomberman IP is huge. It's been around for decades. Was there a lot of pressure to do justice to the original while improving it?
Yes, there was. One of my strongest memories of Bomberman was when we were at CES. So that was in Chicago before it became E3. It was that long ago. We were in a theater drinking Miller Lite. I specifically remember that it was Miller Lite, playing competitively on, a huge cinema screen, and just having a fantastic time. And I don't know which version of Bomberman it was. We could probably, go back in time and work out exactly which one it would be. But fundamentally, Bomberman is one of the out and out best multiplayer games. It's even heck, I'm just trying to pull down the actual name. Fortnite with the ever shrinking play area. Bomberman did that.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, when you put it like that, it did.
Yeah, it totally did. Hilarious. So the pressure was on to do it justice. And we actually had regular visits from the Japanese team who created Bomberman. Yeah. They would come into the office and they would play and they would talk to the team through their interpreter. I remember it might be one of those augmented memories. I'm pretty sure somebody stood up on the boardroom table and was talking with a great deal of passion about how the characters needed to move. Yeah. And we worked on it and we kept on iterating. And it turned out that what was required is that if I am pushing diagonally, for example, if I'm pushing diagonally, I need to move along the wall and then smoothly go around the corner without getting stuck, without any friction at all. And once we had done that, once we'd completely understood what it was that required, there was great delight. And it's one of those things that is like, well, duh, it has to be like that. Getting to that point, I remember, took quite some conversation and interpretation and understanding. So, yeah, again, it was one of those situations where you have somebody that absolutely is completely passionate about what they want, and you work with them to do it. A clear vision is everything.
Was it hard technically to kind of implement the linking up online play, with like the extra players? Because you could do kind of like 2 or 3 player on one system on Xbox, but then you could play that online. Those 2-3 people could play online, with other people. And I guess that would create quite an interesting dynamic. Was that hard to implement, or was it quite easy with the tools already there with Xbox Live?
Thankfully, I was lucky enough to be surrounded by excellent engineers who were way better at that stuff than I was. Steve Snake, I think he was probably the lead engineer on the project. And again, George and Peter Phillips, absolute gurus. And with the support of the folks at Xbox Live, it was easier than it could have been if it needed to have been written by hand or by scratch or from scratch. But I remember it being fun, and I think that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, because you'd have like the home players all linked up, and then someone online would also join, and they'd all pick on that one person, or it'd become like a different game dynamic.
And I remember us testing the heck out of it. It took a lot of testing. I think it might have been the first time that I heard the phrase edge cases. Well, that's an edge case. It depends how close to the edge it actually is, particularly if it's close to the edge of the screen on Bomberman. That was a nerdy thing to say. I enjoyed it too.
Back then, you had a lot of kind of collections of games and arcade compilations and stuff. They did well individually, but you think Xbox Live Arcade really brought it back into the living room and kind of allowed for the acceptance of arcade games on major systems?
I think so. I definitely think so, because we worked on a lot of them. I remember we did Williams, we did Namco, we did lots. Anyway, it was a lot. And those collections, again, being driven by the digital Eclipse emulation tech, were extremely authentic, very, very accessible, and, in some ways as close to a sort of downloadable experience that you would get on your cell phone, as close to that as could have existed then. And I think probably they were more fun because you could have them on a much bigger screen, and it's easier to share when there are a whole bunch of people watching a bigger screen. Some of the game designs that I've been working on lately, they go back to that, which is people sharing an experience on a bigger screen.
And it popped out quite a few series that kind of became quite huge. I remember Castle Crashers was absolutely huge, and that kind of came from that era as well.
Holy smokes, it really did, didn't it? I think I was just reading about another version of that just this morning.
Yeah,
why not?
Like
bring it on.
Flash game got into arcade and then blew up because of that format. Yeah,
I remember going back to the authenticity of some of these collections. I have a very strong memory of arguing when we were doing remastered versions of some of these arcade games. They wanted Defender to look significantly different than it did. And as you can probably already tell, I have a particularly soft spot for Defender. Mm-hmm. And I insisted that it wasn't changed. There was a design for a new ship, and it was like, this is not how it looks in my head. That little collection, that little stack of 8 pixels looks like something in my head, and it doesn't look like this when you show it to me at 1080p. And the mountains, they're just lines. Don't make them look like mountains. And the other thing that I argued about is that they wanted to change the sound effects. And I'm pretty sure I said, over my dead body.
We just literally last week had Sam Dicker on, who did it with Eugene Jarvis and the sound effects. So that's pretty awesome that you're so passionate about Defender.
Yeah, you can't change those sound effects. You can't change the sound effects in a Eugene Jarvis game because they are as fundamentally a part of it as everything else.
100%.
Don't change that.
So speaking of other ports of iconic games, you also ported Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which was another Konami name, along with Bomberman there. Was that quite interesting, or was it kind of a straight port? Because obviously Symphony of the Night has kind of become a legendary game, but at the time in the 90s, it was a bit of a, not a flop, but a bit of an unknown game, and it's definitely kind of got more, what's the word I'm looking for? More love kind of around the late 2000s.
I remember, because of the background that we had in it, I don't know, the love of the game, the love of the medium, that it was an iconic product for us. Castlevania, iconic. Symphony of the Night, iconic. Was it Koji Igarashi that was the creator of it?
Oh, that's one for the Christmas quiz.
Yeah, I don't want to call myself out by getting it wrong, but I do remember that we got the opportunity to emulate it. I'm pretty sure it was another classic Digital Eclipse emulation with Jeff Vavasor, George Phillips, and I do remember working out ways to effectively increase the resolution of the art programmatically by, it wasn't just a straight 1-to-1 pixel expansion. There was a whole bunch of stuff that we did so that it looked better. It was the original art, but it had to look better, going up from a much lower resolution to, at the time, 1080p. I do remember a whole bunch of experimentation around that with Ryan Slemko as the art director, who is still working in pixels, and he's got a currently in progress Kickstarter on the go. So once you love pixels, pixels stay your thing.
But for sure,
that's probably one of my most vivid memories of us mucking around with how to upscale art, which is now a much more prevalent thing.
Well, from upscaling to downscaling, the N-Gage was a really interesting system, and it had such a thin, narrow screen. You did Rifts of Power for the N-Gage, and I was wondering, how was it like getting the whole interface working on such a small thing? And what did you think of the N-Gage system, and what was it like to develop for?
It was another one of those things that was just really cool. It was a fantastic opportunity. I always see the possibilities, always see the joy and the opportunity in these things. And we were working with Nokia at the time, an absolute juggernaut. We were working, frankly, with budgets that were fantastic for us, but rounding errors for Nokia, or Nokia, as it's sometimes known over here. So that was a wonderful opportunity. And it was the challenge that we had in front of us. Trent Ward was friends with the guy who created Rifts. I've actually still got a signed Rifts book, which includes a class that Trent Ward designed. So really, I was overseeing, as the executive producer, I was giving Trent and his team the support that they needed to do Rifts. And James Everett was the lead designer. Maybe he was straight out of VFS at the time. Very, very talented. And, you worked with what you had. So the team and we all wanted to make a Rifts game. We had the Rifts player handbook in front of us. And a new story was written, and a new class was created. And we worked with the restrictions that we had. And I can't even imagine now what the X and Y pixel dimensions of the N-Gage screen are.
Yeah.
It might be smaller than an icon on my screen now.
It's probably the closer to like an iWatch or something in like the
I think
size
it's even
of the
less.
screen. Yeah.
I think it's even less. I really do. But there was information that needed to be shown, and we found a way. James as the lead designer, Trent as the creative director, found a way to make it work on the N-Gage.
I saw a video of it.
That was the joy.
It had the kind of isometric world, of course, but then you had the interfaces like sliding in and out left and right. And I thought that was quite a cool way of doing it. So, off the screen, you had these things that would then come in, and it kind of felt like it expanded it a little bit.
It did. And, if your screen is small, you have to pretend that you have a bigger screen. And as you say, slide things in and out. It's like, well, yeah, they're always there. You just can't see them. But you asked what I thought about the N-Gage. I never realized how ridiculous people thought it was. We got the side talking. We got the fact that in order to change the game cartridge, you would have to flip off the back, take out the battery, put the cartridge in, put the battery back in, switch your phone back on again. I could see why they did that, because I would imagine that the circuitry didn't exist to have hot swapping of cartridges. So they needed to make sure that the device was powered down. It was revolutionary and slightly insane, and also wonderful.
Yeah.
That's why I thought of the N-Gage.
It felt like, Nokia was at the top of their game, and they were the absolute juggernaut, that kind of, it's hard to explain to kids nowadays how big it was. But it also felt like it was kind of version 1 of something, it was like a kind of a prototype of a new concept that would get refined over time, and then it just kind of disappeared.
Yeah. Wasn't it the first version of what ultimately became the iPhone?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, probably.
So another great handheld that you worked with, which went on to be a little bit more successful in the N-Gage, was the PSP. You worked on Sonic Rivals there. What was your involvement there? What was that like, working on a Sonic game?
It was an honor. Sonic, iconic Sonic. We worked with the creator of Sonic. He came over to the office, and we brainstormed for several days as to what kind of game he wanted to see. Sonic runs fast. So what better way to showcase that than to have a race? I still remember laying out that first level with the team, with Taylor Miller, Zoe Kerno, and who was the lead engineer? Quirky, I've forgotten for now. Anyway, I remember laying it out and putting together all of the logic. And the Japanese team were very, very involved in everything, in the tuning, they were working with spreadsheets full of the numbers that they needed to make it feel right and there was an awful lot of backwards and forwards. And that might actually been another one where we needed to work on streaming because those little discs were interesting and they were proprietary, probably as iconic as Sonic was. I still have them. I've still got them. I've actually still got the PSP that I was using at the time to develop Sonic Rivals and Sonic Rivals 2. I don't actually have any discs that we burned, but I do have the production version still sealed. I wonder if those discs will still work. One of the things that sticks in my memory about it is that Sega Japan wanted to call it Sonic and Rivals.
Oh.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Sonic and Rivals. Because it was Sonic, he's the main character, and Rivals. But we convinced them that Sonic Rivals just rolled off the tongue way, way more easily. And that was the name that got stuck with. Yeah.
And I remember it had a really, really good soundtrack. It was quite short, but it had some really good bangers. And especially when it got into Sonic Rivals 2 as well, there was an improvement with, double the playable characters. And it was a nice little title, especially for that kind of smaller system. And it's hard, developing handheld titles when they're kind of trapped in that handheld world.
I still think it's a great piece of hardware. And even now, I play my PlayStation 5 games remotely from time to time on my PlayStation Portal, and people still want a powerful handheld machine from Sony. We've now got the Steam Deck. We've now got a couple of others. The ROG Ally. There's a few, handheld PCs. We just heard that the Switch 2 is going to be announced, but I bet that is only going to be as much more powerful as it needs to be to run the next thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, people still want something like a contemporary PSP. I'd love to do something with that. That'd be amazing.
It would be wicked to see. They did the, I forget the name of it, but the PlayStation 5 screen last year, didn't they? Which connects to your PlayStation 5. As long as it's switched on, it works anywhere in the world.
Yeah, that's the Portal.
The Portal, that's it. I couldn't remember what it was called. Too new for me.
it's actually a delicious machine. It's great. It feels like a wide PlayStation controller, but it feels exactly like playing the PlayStation. You've got the screen in front of you. And it lets me play games whilst sat on the couch, as opposed to being sat down in my game dungeon.
Yeah, spend some time with the wife. So that's been absolutely fantastic, Joe. Absolutely loved hearing the rest of your story. Can you tell us what you're up to nowadays?
I most certainly can. I recently left Unity as part of the shakeup. I was lucky enough to have worked on the Apple Vision Pro before it was released. And I'm lucky enough to have an Apple Vision Pro. And I'm currently doing stuff in that space, creating very, very high fidelity, high quality experiences, because as pieces of hardware go, it is certainly the most powerful thing I've ever strapped to my head. So I'm working in that. The game that I was working with at Unity was released yesterday. Nancy Drew and the Mystery of the Seven Keys, that came out on PC and Mac. We're very, very proud of the work that we did there. And I've got a couple of other things on the go. One of the things that is really holding my attention and giving me a lot of joy is teaching. I just taught the Game Design 71 cohort at Vancouver Film School. And I'm lined up to teach new cohorts employment prep, where we create cover letters and CVs and do interview practice, which is more important than ever in these tricky industry times that we're experiencing right now.
Yeah. Oh, it's wonderful. Giving back, I guess, as well. Giving back to the next generation.
It gives me, I love it. Literally love it. It's fabulous. So, yes.
Yeah, kind of passing on your knowledge, but also, when you started with the C64, there were none of those kind of courses around, and now there's thousands. So it's great to see you involved.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it's so funny because, I'm like, I published my first game in 1987. Some of the people that I'm teaching were like, I was born in 2003.
Yeah, makes you feel old, definitely.
It's brilliant. It's fabulous.
Awesome, Joe. Well, thank you so much for coming on again.
It's been a huge pleasure. I've enjoyed it and I appreciate it very much.